So welcome. This is Racial Justice Falmouth's first big public event. We welcome you to the understanding of hate crimes. We have some great guests and speakers for you today. Racial Justice Falmouth meets, generally speaking, once a month, and we do a variety of things within our group, and we always kick it off with a land acknowledgement that was written several years ago. So we're going to start with that today as well. Every community owes its existence and vitality to generations from around the world who contributed their hopes, dreams, and energy to making the history that led to this moment. Some were brought here against their will. Some were drawn to leave their distant homes in hope of a better life. And some have lived on this land for more generations than can be counted. Truth and acknowledgement are critical to building mutual respect and connection across all barriers of heritage and difference. We begin this effort to acknowledge what has been buried by honoring the truth. We are standing on the ancestral and current lands of the Wampanoag people. We pay respect to their elders, past and present. Please take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that bring us here together today. And please join us in uncovering the truth. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. Welcome, everyone. Does everyone have a seat that wants one? Great. My name is Megan Hanawalt, and I'm one of 3 co-founders of Racial Justice Falmouth. Can you hear me okay? Sometimes we say RJF, just shorter, so. We formed in May of 2019 with the mission to investigate, understand, and improve racial justice in our community through self-education, monthly dialogues around topics that address racial issues, and community events that also address racial issues. This event is one way that we're striving towards achieving our mission. And I just want to take a few minutes to talk about this event. It's a true collaboration and a labor of shared interests and goals among the following groups that are key to why we're here today. The first is the Falmouth Police Department. The catalyst and driver or motivator of this event is Lieutenant Ryan Hurt, who planted the seeds for this gathering almost a year ago. At least for me. I don't know if you planted them somewhere else earlier, so thank you for that. Also, the Barnstable County Human Rights Advisory Commission with Leslie Dominguez-Santos bringing her expertise and experience to share today. Also, the Cape Cod NAACP, its president, Lynn Rhodes' support has been integral to making this event a success. Thank you, Lynn. The Cape and Islands DA's office, Kelly Queeley, the community engagement officer for the DA, and Danielle Whitney, Director of Community Programs, have enthusiastically supported this event and have been great in ensuring that this event meets the needs of our Falmouth community. We would like to acknowledge also our community partners. Please, they come with resources, information, and they're here to help in our endeavor to understand hate crimes and build a better community. And finally, I want to thank the Racial Justice Falmouth Board for planning and executing this event. You've been amazing. Some of you may know I've been out of commission for the past month, and so I was a little worried it wasn't going to happen, but of course it would. The board is fantastic, so thank you, RJF board. A few words about the structure for the next hour or so. The first portion of this event has 2 presentations and 1 talk. And each of these will explain in some form or other what hate crimes, civil rights violations, and general discrimination are and how they're handled. The first presentation is by Lieutenant Ryan Hurt of the Falmouth Police Department, and the second presentation is by Leslie Dominguez-Santos of the Barnstable County HRAC. Do you mind if I just use? Okay. We also have our DA, the Cape and Islands District Attorney, Rob Galaboys, here, and he'll discuss afterwards what to do if you're a victim and how things might proceed through the court system. And if there's time, we're going to open it up to Q&A. The second portion of this event has community members who have experienced hate crimes, violations, discrimination here on Cape Cod and are willing to share about their experience. And if time allows, we will allow members of the audience to also share. We will not take questions during this section of the event. The final part of the event is, let's see what resources are out there. Let's meet each other. Let's build that better community that we're striving for. Talk to the DA's office. Talk to, your neighbor. This is a community event, so we appreciate if you stay and engage. So thank you for that. With that, I'm going to introduce our first two speakers. Lieutenant Ryan Hertz up first. He serves with the Falmouth Police Department. He oversees the patrol division and supervising the department's 2 clinical social workers. He also acts as the public information officer and civil rights officer. Lieutenant Hurt began his law enforcement career in 2013 as a jail officer with the Suffolk County Sheriff's Department before joining the Falmouth PD in 2015. Ryan distinguished himself as a school resource officer, and in 2019 he earned the Falmouth Police Department's Officer of the Year award. Lieutenant Hurt holds a bachelor's degree in criminal justice from Bridgewater State University, and he's currently pursuing a master's degree at Anna Maria College. Recently, Lieutenant Hurt provided training to veteran Falmouth officers on the ABLE program, an initiative by Georgetown University designed to teach active bystandership, prevent misconduct, reduce mistakes, and promote officer wellness. He is married to Katie Hurt, the special education building administrator at Falmouth High School here, and they are proud parents of 2 children. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Megan, for that introduction. And thank you, everybody that came here today and gave up some time on this beautiful Sunday to listen to me and Leslie. But I really appreciate that. And these events are very important going forward with the Falmouth Police Department. We do now have a full-time community engagement team. We want to come to events like this. We want to co-sponsor events like this. So if you're looking for the police department to get involved, we have 2 members of our community engagement team here, Officer Steve Sr. and Officer Julia Massey. So to speak with them afterwards. We also have our clinical social worker, Stephanie Doherty, over there. So make sure to say hi and meet them afterwards. My presentation is going to focus on hate crimes and civil rights violations. I've been the civil rights officer for the department for a few years now. My interest started shortly after I got out of the police academy in 2015. One of the suggestions from veteran officers to get involved and make your way through the ranks was to get involved, and get involved. So one of my first specialty assignments at the police department was volunteering with the No Place for Hate organization. We planned a couple of really successful Cape Cod Pride celebrations in Falmouth before they moved to down in Hyannis. I do have a lifelong interest in this subject. I grew up in a multiracial household. So that sort of sparked my interest in hate crime, civil rights violations, and I really embraced the role. About 2020, when I got chosen as the civil rights officer for the town, most police departments have a civil rights officer with their department, and their main goal is to work with the community, educate the department, be the subject matter expert, which sometimes I dislike calling myself an expert, but for the department, and monitor hate crime stats and work with other agencies. So I've been doing that for a few years. So the goals of this presentation, we're going to define hate crimes and civil rights violations, understand Massachusetts law on hate crimes, explore common types of hate crimes. I am going to give some community examples over the last 5 years of incidents that we've experienced in town. We're going to differentiate hate crimes and hate incidents. In my work as a civil rights officer, it's often misunderstood what constitutes a hate crime and what constitutes hate incidents. They have a lot of similarities, but they are different. We're also going to examine some trends and data on hate crimes in Massachusetts. Those will come from EOPS, Executive Office of Public Safety. I'm going to explain the role of law enforcement in responding to hate crimes, and I'm going to end with how to report hate crimes and hate incidents. If you'll let me, I'm going to give you a very brief annotated lesson on criminal law 101. And bear with me because I'm doing it in front of Rob Galliboy, the leading attorney on Cape Cod. So we'll discuss afterwards. You can tweak anything if I got it wrong. When we talk about hate crimes and civil rights violations, we want to have a good foundation on what is a crime, who investigates it, where it gets prosecuted. So our sources of criminal law in Massachusetts come from three sources. One is statutes. Those are your Mass General laws. Each chapter corresponds with a different set of laws. Ones that the police department uses a lot. 265 is crimes against persons. That's your assault and battery, your domestic crimes. 266 is crimes against property. Vandalism is malicious destruction of property. So we work off the statutes. We also work off of common law. These are cases decided by the Mass Appeals Court and Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court. Those interpret the laws. So sometimes when you're reading Mass General Law, they'll have very vague language. What defines a battery? What defines an assault? What defines something like recklessness? And that's found in case law. That's common law. We also have regulations. The Code of Massachusetts regulations is one of those that we don't use too much. There's some for motor vehicle laws. And then we also have regulatory agencies like the ABCC, Alcoholic Beverage Control Commission, and the Registry of Motor Vehicles that can set its own laws and enforce their own laws. When we're talking about crime, after an investigation, police departments have to be very cognizant on, we have all the elements of that crime. The first element that we need to try to prove is intent. There's different sorts of intent. First one being specific. Specific intent is that person knew they were committing that specific crime. Next one is general. The person knew they were committing a crime. They knew they were doing something wrong. Malicious. They acted on purpose with a real clear intent. We also have reckless intent. Driving 100 miles an hour is an example of that. We also have negligence. Negligence we use sometimes, it's very similar to reckless. Negligent corresponds a lot of the times with OUIs. You get in the car intoxicated, you're being negligent, you're causing a risk to public safety. Our last one is strict liability, which is, it's specifically defined in the statute. Similar to minor in possession of alcohol, you have to be 21 to possess alcohol in Massachusetts. There's different rights of arrest for these different crimes. It's not easy for officers to fully comprehend the rights of arrest sometimes. A pretty basic one is warrants. Those are very easy. Those are issued by judges. Probable cause was determined at the court level, and the judge commands us to make an arrest. We also can make an arrest on probable cause. Generally, we can make an arrest if it's a breach of peace and it's a misdemeanor. If it's a felony, all we need to do is establish probable cause, and we can make that arrest on the felony. So we have felonies, we have misdemeanors. Some misdemeanors are arrestable, some are not. Some are arrestable by statute, some are arrestable only when they're a breach of peace in the officer's presence. When we look at penalties, you'll find in the statutes, they mention specifically prison or house of corrections in there. Prison is state prison, generally sentences of more than 2.5 years. And when you see house of corrections, it's sentences under 2.5 years. That's our Barnstable County Correctional Complex on right next to Joint Base Cape Cod. The courts can also order probation. They can continue it without a finding. That's called a quaff, or they can issue fines. Jurisdiction and venue of crimes, 2 major courts. We have district court, which handles bylaws, misdemeanors, and felonies, usually not more than 5 years. In prison, if that's in the statute. And then we have superior court, which is generally the more serious crimes. Those are subject to a prison sentence of more than 2.5 years. Statute of limitations on crimes, we need to know when the crime happened, we need to know where it happened, and make sure we can investigate it. Generally, it's 6 years for statute of limitations. There are some exceptions for things like murder, which is no limitations. Child sexual assault, there's no limitations. And then some of them have 10 years. Robbery and some other sexual assault cases. Briefly, when we look at the history of hate crimes and civil rights, I made a little time chart just to show you how long it took us to get here and some of the advances in the last 10 years. In 1865, the first real bad hate crimes began happening that were publicized, and those were perpetrated by the Ku Klux Klan. They were founded shortly after the Civil War, and they started acting, utilizing intimidation and violence, mostly because they felt threatened by the newly freed slaves. After that, that led to the passing of the first Civil Rights Act in 1866. This first act labeled all persons that were born in America citizens, including the formerly enslaved, except for Native Americans. The only problem with the Act of 1866, there was no enforcement in there. They passed a couple acts in 1870 and 1871 that added some enforcement in there. Judges could monitor polling stations. The president could order the military to get involved, but there wasn't much enforcement at all of those acts. The original act in 1866, President Johnson, Andrew Johnson, actually vetoed, and it got overturned in Congress after his veto. After that, we had the Reconstruction phase in the United States, and civil rights were included in that Reconstruction. However, after Reconstruction ended about 1880, nothing was really being done with civil rights. In 1939, the DOJ created the first Civil Liberties Unit, and they started investigating racial discrimination, political repression, and advocated for civil rights. There wasn't much impact on that either until Dwight D. Eisenhower signed Civil Rights Act of 1957, and this aimed at protecting voting rights in America. This also had limited impact, but it did start shifting the civil rights movement. That brings us to the major civil rights acts of 64 and 68, which ended discrimination based on protective classes. It accelerated desegregation in schools and strengthened enforcement. Since that time, especially in the last 30 years, we've had some updates, especially to federal law. The Church Arson Prevention Act was signed in 96, the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Hate Crime Prevention Act in 2009, COVID-19 Hate Crime Prevention Act, 2021, which aimed to protect Asian and Pacific Islanders from threats based on COVID-19 conspiracies. We also have the 2022 Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Act, which defined lynching as basically a hate crime committed by a mob due to bias. Massachusetts law, the first hate crime law was enacted in 1981. 1991 amended laws to include hate crimes motivated by sexual orientation. 95 was the first hate crimes task force established. 2006, an act relative to hate crimes passes. And 2009, establishment of hate crimes reporting system. Do hate crimes and hate incidents happen in Falmouth? Yes, they do. Do they happen more than the public knows? Probably. There have been some publicized hate crimes that have happened in Falmouth in the last 5 years. There's some that haven't been publicized, that haven't been caught by the media. So, if you will, I have a list of selected hate crimes that have happened in Falmouth since 2019. I left out names, specifics, everything to protect people's privacies in here. October 2019, staff at the Falmouth Jewish congregation found a desecrated Israel flag on their community center lawn. The flag had red spray paint on there with the numbers 14 and 88, both alluding to Nazism, and it had a swastika on there. This came just days after Yom Kippur was celebrated at the congregation. Came to find out that this flag was stolen from a church in Katuitt, desecrated, and left on the lawn. In October 2020, local resident walked to the end of their driveway and found a doll with a racial slur found next to the road. January 2021, a swastika was carved in the bench at Morse Pond School. July 2021, swastika was painted on a trash bin at Minot Beach. August 2021, there were dozens of spray paints found at the bridge near the John Parker Bogs. This included racial slurs, references to the KKK, swastikas, and anti-police language. Cost the DPW between $15,000 and $20,000 to repaint that bridge. April 2021, there was a break and entering to a house under construction where racial slurs were spray painted on the walls. In November 2021, a dispute happened at a house party. A young male in his 20s entered the house, assaulted another black male in his 20s. In the course of the assault, he said a racial slur 7 times. He then went out to his car, retrieved a firearm, and shot multiple rounds towards the house. That suspect was found. He was indicted to Superior Court, sentenced to 12 months, had 2.5 years suspended sentence and 3 years probation. In May 2023, a female was enjoying dinner at a local restaurant when a male noticed a tattoo in Hebrew on her arms. He made comments to her, called her multiple slurs, and then threatened her, saying that he would kill her if she followed him after she called police. He was charged with threat to commit a crime and a hate crime. He was convicted and got sentenced to 1 year probation. October 2023, a resident had a problem with teens cutting through his yard. As they were cutting through, they threw rocks, they smashed his pumpkins, and they screamed racial slurs at him. In August 2023, we were called to a domestic assault and learned that a father had attacked his adult son or his adult child after he informed him that he was transitioning. In January 2024, a swastika was found on Randall Pond off of Jaget Road. And that was the well-publicized incident where the swastika was dug out in snow. Those aren't all the incidents that we've had, but they're a selection. I don't want to keep going on. So yes, hate crimes do happen here. Definition of a hate crime, according to Mass General Law, any criminal act coupled with overt actions motivated by bigotry and bias, including but not limited to a threatened, attempted, or completed overt action motivated at least in part by racial, religious, ethnic, handicap, gender identity, or sexual orientation, prejudice, or otherwise deprives another person of his constitutional rights by threats, intimidation, coercion, or which seeks to interfere with or disrupt a person's existence of constitutional rights through harassment or intimidation. I will say Leslie in her presentation will clearly define protected classes. So when we get into the specific civil rights or the hate crime laws that are on the books in Massachusetts, our first one's going to be interfering with civil rights. The elements of that crime: the suspect willing to use force or threat of force to attempt or actually interfere with or intimidate or oppress because of bias towards the victims, actual or perceived protected classes. This exercise by the victim was a right secured by the Constitution of the United States. When we're talking about rights secured by the Constitution, we're talking about personal security, housing, travel, employment, religious worship, voting, education, access to public places, access to private places open for the public, protection from public officials, which specifically refers to police. The right of arrest, this is a misdemeanor. We can only make an arrest for this if we see it in person, unless it involves bodily injury. Then we can arrest in the past on probable cause. And the penalties are listed below. This is our major hate crime statute in Massachusetts: assault or battery for purpose of intimidation. The elements: the suspect committed an assault or assault and battery, damaged the victim's property with the intent to intimidate based on a list of protected characteristics. Our right of arrest, again, misdemeanor, a right for arrest for breach of peace and presence only. Otherwise, we have to do a complaint, which is an application for criminal charges to the court. If the act involved bodily injury or firearms, it is a felony. It is arrestable in the past on probable cause. You'll see the penalties off to the right. Another specific hate crime statute: destruction of or threats to destroy a place of worship. The suspect willingly or wantonly destroyed, defaced, or injured a church, synagogue, mosque, temple, or place of worship, an affiliated school or community center, or a place used for the purpose of burial or memorializing the dead, or the grounds adjacent to the above structures, or the suspect threatens to burn, mar, injure, or destroy any place listed above. Our right of arrest: we can arrest if it was over $5,000 worth of damage. Otherwise, it's a complaint unless it's in our presence. The penalties are listed below. When we're investigating these reported crimes, investigators are trained to use two sorts of evidence. Direct evidence: this is evidence we use in most crimes. First, we're going to look for physical evidence, any sort of forensic evidence, biological evidence, fingerprints. We're going to look for digital evidence. We're going to look for security camera footage. We're going to canvass the neighborhood. We're going to, if cell phones or computers were involved, we're going to be seizing those devices. If there is any nexus to social media accounts, we'll be freezing those social media accounts. Police can do what's called a preservation order. Verizon, say, will delete text messages after 3 days unless the police preserve them. Then we follow that up with a search warrant or subpoena to have access to those. Any direct witness statements, we're going to canvass the neighborhood. We're going to get victim statements, and we're going to try and interview the suspect. Indirect evidence is very important to any kind of hate crime or civil rights violation because we have to prove bias. The hate crime laws won't stand up in court if we can't prove that that act wasn't motivated by some sort of bias toward that individual. And it's not just full bias, it's partial bias as well. If there were 3 motivating factors for that crime and 1 was bias, we can still charge for it. We're going to be looking at the suspect's background and profile. We're going to be looking at their social media accounts, what kind of groups they're in, are they involved with any hate crimes, any hate groups. We're going to be looking for contextual evidence. Does this relate to a string of hate crimes or hate incidences in town, the county, or the state? We're going to be looking at the date of the incident. I said before, the desecrated flag was left on the FJC lawn a few days after Yom Kippur. Is it a special date that is associated with that protected class? That's going to help us develop this probable cause for the bias. We're also going to look at crime trends. Is this happening more and more? When you go back and look at the COVID time and the hate crimes against Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, does it relate to those sort of crime trends that we're seeing? In order for the police to charge on these crimes, we need what's called probable cause to charge. This is, in very simple terms, if the crime occurred, is it more probable than not if the crime occurred? We related a lot to about 51%. In order to get the conviction in court, they need proof beyond a reasonable doubt. We have additional investigating agencies in Massachusetts. Specifically, I just got a presentation a few weeks ago. I went out to the Civil Rights Symposium. All the civil rights officers in Massachusetts gather for an 8-hour training. And the Massachusetts State Police Hate Crimes Awareness and Response Team was there and put on a presentation, and they are more willing to help. They have a dual role in advocacy, community engagement for civil rights and hate crimes violations, and they also help with investigations. The Attorney General's Civil Rights Division from the state, they can get involved and they can issue fines, and also they can order injunctions. You'll see that they got involved with the hate incident on Nantucket. That suspect was ordered by the Civil Rights Division not to go close to the victim, not to step foot on the grounds, not to commit any more crimes. Any violation of that injunction is an extra criminal charge for that suspect. We also have the Department of Justice, Federal Bureau of Investigation, who also put on a presentation a few weeks ago. They do have a field office in Boston with some dedicated members to the Civil Rights Division. They just had a very interesting case out of Boston. An interracial couple posted their engagement on Facebook, and they were trolled by a white supremacist who got into their Facebook Messenger and started writing a lot of slurs and broad threats. The woman wrote back and said, "I'm going to the police to support this." He then sent a picture of a pair of brass knuckles and made a threat to commit violence because she was reporting it to the police. The Federal Bureau the FBI got involved. The sergeant for BPD had just taken a training and met with that division. He called them. In order for the FBI to get involved, they have to have specific jurisdiction over that crime, something like hate crimes or other serious crimes, or there has to be, it has to involve interstate commerce, which when I first heard that, I said, what involves interstate commerce? And the way they explained it, anything where you can tie between two states. So public road is interstate commerce. If the crime happened in a public road, if it happened over the internet, that's interstate commerce. He even went as far as to say if you kick somebody with a shoe made outside of the United States and use that as a weapon. Because the shoe was made outside the United States, you could prove interstate commerce. So the FBI offered their services. This case went to trial. They did a search warrant on his house. They found hundreds of weapons in his house, between knives, brass knuckles, airsoft rifles, black powder rifles, ammunition. He was also a documented white supremacist. They led the investigation. He got convicted in federal court and sentenced to 7 years for an online threat. So sometimes it's beneficial to involve the FBI in these investigations. When we're investigating these and we're speaking with the victim, we're using best practices from the International Chiefs of Police Association. All of these kind of crimes are victim-centered approach, similar to when we investigate sex crimes. Somebody wants to come and report something, that doesn't automatically mean we're going to investigate. Sometimes they just want their story documented, and like I said, they had those 6 years for that statute of limitations to run out. So you can come, make your report, and it's victim-centered. If you say, hey, I don't want anything done, we're not going to do anything. We're going to document it, and we're going to wait for you to tell us, hey, we want an investigation, we want to pursue charges. Investigators should remain calm, objective, and professional. Again, we let victims defer questions and allow them to vent. We're going to involve their family, friends, and other support systems that they have. We're going to reassure them that they are not to blame, request a translator if one's necessary. We're going to offer support and advice for their safety. We're going to reassure the protection of their identity, inform the sequence of events going forward. Once you report a crime and you say, I want to see it through and I want an investigation, it is an arduous process. Sometimes these heavy investigations take a couple of years. You might have to testify in multiple court hearings, and it's really hard on the victims. So knowing what they're going to get themselves into up front eases it along the way. We're going to provide information referrals for community resources. When we're looking at hate crimes versus hate instances, a hate crime, again, a criminal act motivated by bias. It's illegal under state and federal law, and there's enhanced penalties for state crimes. A hate incident is behavior that expresses bias or prejudice but does not constitute a criminal act. That's a major piece here. When you're looking at hate crimes, they have to be a crime that's already on the books. Hate incidents can include slurs, derogatory language, and some form of harassment. Fortunately, hate incidences often are protected by the First Amendment. We can go back to, I think it was 1977, the Skokie incident right outside of Chicago. The ACLU defended a group of neo-Nazis in marching in a parade, and they won under the free speech in the First Amendment. The similarities, both are motivated by bias, both cause significant harm to victims in the community. This is the biggest piece I want everyone to know. Both should be reported. You might be disappointed if an officer says, hey, that doesn't meet the threshold of a crime, but it's very important to get that documented. I'll talk about a crime later, but say there's a crime on the books, criminal harassment. Usually what we look for is, or what's in the statute, is 3 documented incidences of some form of behavior that a reasonable person would find emotionally troubling. And if you come in with 1 incident and we document it, and then you come in with 2 more incidents with the same person, now we're looking at criminal charges. This also is very important when we're building cases, again, when we're trying to get that suspect background and character profile. If they have other instances of hate, we could use that in our attempt to prove bias. This is really important too with juveniles too. When we look at juveniles, the good news is the data shows when juveniles commit hate crimes, it's often thrill related. It's often not serious bigotry or hatred. And what the data shows is that these especially juveniles can be rehabilitated in their views. The schools a few years ago has really focused on restorative justice and restorative practices. Our 2 school resource officers have a direct link between the police department and the schools. So if something happens outside of schools, the school resource officers are the only ones in the department that can legally tell the school what's going on, so we can get the school involved and keep them out of the court system. We generally deal with juveniles in a jail diversion model. We don't want to charge juveniles. We don't want to arrest juveniles. We try all other means to rehabilitate juveniles so we're not adding to the school to prison pipeline. So it's really important to get those reported, and so we could find some other sort of resource to try and rehabilitate that juvenile. A lot of the times actually I'll talk nationally, when you look at hate crime data by the FBI and then you look at hate crime data from the National Crime Victim Survey, it's off, it's skewed. The National Crime Victim Survey is self-reported incidences that happened to them, and not all of them went to the police. What we have is only data of things that get reported to us. Why don't people want to report hate crimes? Fear of re-victimization. Like I said, the court process sometimes is arduous, and thinking that you're going to have to go on stand and face your accuser is really troubling for some people, and it re-victimizes that person. Fear of retaliation. Fear of being outed. This especially relates to people where a hate crime was being perpetrated by their sexual orientation. Fear of law enforcement and associated general trauma. We deal with this a lot in law enforcement because something happened to a person's family, whether it was 1 year ago, whether it was generations ago. Those stories are told throughout the family, and it creates a mistrust in police. We all wear the same uniform. The Falmouth uniform hasn't changed in years and years and years. So some people don't want to report to law enforcement. They don't trust us, either because of a specific incident or what they see on in the media. We've been fighting this for some time now. We struggle with having people who are undocumented report crimes to us. We've tried to get the word out there through the newspaper. We have handouts. We don't report to ICE. The Falmouth Police Department doesn't report someone's immigration status to ICE. The only time we will ask is to see if that person wants us to call their consulate if they're placed under arrest. And we're not reporting to ICE, and the consulate is completely different than ICE. So we implore, if anyone hears of a victim of a crime who's worried about this, please let them know. We don't report their immigration status. Humiliation and shame, lack of a support system, cultural and language barriers. If we are looking at a crime and can't fit it in one of those 3 hate crimes that are on the books, specific hate crimes that are on the books, our reporting system allows us to put in bias with another crime in there that will get documented as a hate crime. Other crimes, criminal harassment, again, that's 3 documented instances of causing a person emotional distress. Stalking, similar criminal harassment, but it involves force or a threat of force. Arson of a church. Vandalism of real or personal property. This one's always a felony. Disturbing an assembly. It does have to be a lawful assembly, like a church or a school. Disturbing the peace. Disturbing the peace is an interesting one. It really focuses on time, place, and manner. There's a difference between yelling and screaming. Say we're talking about yelling racial slurs in the middle of the night versus at a rally, at some sort of counter protest. We have to look at time, place, and manner. Then we have your disorderly conduct, fighting tumultuous behavior in public. And then we have threat to commit a crime, which is if you verbally threaten or a written threat to commit a crime that's already on the books. So what we can do is we can add a bias indicator to any of those crimes. This is data from EOPS, Executive Office of Public Safety and Security. We report all of our hate crime data to EOPS. It is a voluntary reporting system, but there's only, between all the towns and cities in Massachusetts, there's only a handful that don't report. As you can see, this is a chart from 14 to 2022. They stay within a range about 100. The average is 400 since 2014. I will say this ends at 2022. We report to the state. The state then looks at those numbers and confirms stuff with us, asks questions to us about those numbers. Then they go to the FBI, and FBI puts the numbers through similar scrutiny. So the 2022 numbers were released in September of last year. So we are still waiting on the 2023 numbers. This is specifically for Barnstable County, categories of bias reported, and these are bias as reported by the officers who took the report. Anti-race is the number one bias reported at 53%, anti-religion, 21%, anti-sexual orientation, 19.7, anti-gender, 1, and anti-gender identity, 5. This is crimes reported during the bias incident. The most one, this is the 2022 numbers, destruction or vandalism, 143 with intimidation, and then simple assault at 100. Crimes by the victim's race. So the most perpetrated for, let's say, intimidation, which is one of the number ones, that's 60 Black or African American. Barnstable County is highlighted under that first arrow. This is crime by reporting agency. Barnstable County had a total of 15 hate crimes in 2022. This is by the location. So you can see residents or homes with the number 1, highway, road, alley, street, 88, schools, elementary and secondary, 36. This is a table of all the towns that reported. There were more towns that reported 0 incidents than actually reported incidents. Falmouth reported 2, and I think the only other Cape Town on there was Barnstable that reported 2. Number 1, not surprisingly, Boston, 159, followed by Cambridge and Newton. These are all available online. If you just have to Google Hate Crimes Task Force EOPS, they'll come on there. Falmouth Police Department, our roles and responsibility. Let's go through these. I got to wrap this up. Some of the things that we're doing about hate crimes and civil rights violations. Fortunately, the Falmouth Police Department hired 24 new officers this year. This creates us to be a more proactive department. Before, when we were down 20 people, we tended to be a reactive department. We've added two detectives to our detective bureau. We're investing in upgrading in technology right now. We're purchasing Celebrate right now, which will allow us to download people's phones with a search warrant. We also had our first AI presentation the other day, which was funny. We just upped our school resource officers. We have 2. Officer Senior just started his first week. He'll be our second school resource officer in town. Dedicated civil rights officer, and we have a great working relationship with the DA's office and partner agencies. For training, Mass Police Training Council mandates training on civil rights and hate crimes at in-service. We all have had implicit bias training. Increased reporting, we have to actually teach officers how to include that bias on there. There was a big criminal justice reform bill in 2020. In that law where it bans chokeholds, that started the study on qualified immunity. It also explicitly put in there bias-free policing. ABLE training, we just finished up, like Megan said, we just finished up training the whole department on active bystander training. That's an 8-hour training for every officer. It was created in 2021 following the George Floyd incident, where 1 officer committed federal crimes and 3 officers sat there and did nothing. It empowers officers to step up and do something if they see anything going wrong. And as you'll see here, we have our community engagement team that's working on building positive relationships and repairing relationships with the community. This is my last slide. Ways to report a hate crime or incident in Falmouth. If you're in need of immediate assistance, call 911. If there's an incident that happened in the past, you can call our non-emergency number, and an officer will either come out to you or ask you to come in. Just remember, if something happened, the sooner the crime's reported, the higher chances of it being solved. You can also walk into the police station. We're open 24 hours a day. You can report online at falmouthpolice.com. Or if you have any questions, concerns, comments afterwards, I'm going to put my business cards up there. If you experienced a hate crime, hate incident in the past and want to talk about it and see what needed to be done, and you want a friendly face to talk to, give me a call or just email me and we'll set something up. That's all I have.
Wow, that was awesome. Thank you so much, Ryan. I learned a lot. I have a few more questions, so I'm going to introduce Leslie Dominguez Santos. She's going to speak next, and she's the Human Rights Coordinator for Barnstable County. She works with the Human Rights Advisory Commission to uphold and protect the rights of residents and visitors to Barnstable County and to increase community understanding and support for all individuals across Cape Cod. Ms. Dominguez Santos has a long career of community-based work, particularly with and for Latinx and immigrant populations. This includes raising millions of dollars for critical environmental justice work in Chelsea and in East Boston. Includes publishing a groundbreaking health equity report, and also includes advocacy work for affordable housing and anti-human trafficking efforts. She's the proud mother of 3, has served on numerous community boards, and this Friday, she will receive the 2024 Latino Excellence Award at the State House. So welcome, Leslie.
Thank you. Give me 1 second. Technology is not my thing, but this should work. Yes? No? Yes. All right. Buenas tardes. Gracias por tenerme aquí hoy. Thank you for having me. Again, my name is Leslie Dominguez Santos, and I am the Human Rights Coordinator for Barnstable County. We, like Racial Justice Falmouth, acknowledge that Cape Cod occupies the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Wampanoag tribes. I was going to step in front of the microphone, but here I am. Everywhere I go, people are like, what? Barnstable County has a Human Rights Commission? We do. And in fact, the Human Rights Commission has existed in some form or another since 2005. We're coming up on our 20th anniversary next year. The Human Rights Advisory Commission is made up of 9 appointed commissioners. Travis Mapp was here. He's one of our commissioners. We also have liaisons from most of the 15 towns in the county and the tribal nations. Our mission is to promote equal opportunity for all persons of Barnstable County, regardless of who they are and how they identify. So we do a lot of things, and a lot of them are community education, events like these. But today, what I really want to talk about is number 4 and number 6, which is that we receive intakes. So members of the community find us on the internet, or they call to share discriminatory incidents that they have experienced. Now, a lot of what we do is referral out to community organizations and places that have lawyers, because I'm not a lawyer, I'm a social worker. So we do a lot of referral out, but we also do track reports. Now, like the lieutenant said, we know that for every report we receive, there are many more that happen that we don't hear about because people are afraid. But we do track our reports, the incidents that come into us, so that we can inform the community about what's happening in our community. So again, the lieutenant covered a lot of these definitions, but what's important when we talk about hate crimes, hate incidents, discrimination, and bias is that all of them are motivated based on a person's actual or their perceived protected class. So what does that mean? What is a protected class? Well, federal and state law identify personal characteristics by which somebody might be discriminated against. So what we have here are the 10 federal designations, as well as the additional 4 more in Massachusetts, yay, Massachusetts, by which people can be protected by law. So the one that we need to talk about a lot is race. It's first up there. It's the one that most incidents occur are race-based incidents. But I will share a few stories about several of these protected classes. And I will say I've been in my position for about 2 years, and I have received reports about every single one of these. So our civil rights law protects people in certain spaces. And again, I don't want to repeat anything that the lieutenant said, but here are places whereby you are protected: housing, all forms of employment, education, health services, and so on. I know you can all read. So there you go. And I think some of these will be available later. So, and you can always reach out to me if you have questions. When I share our data, I want to share a caveat, which is that the data that we take in, we don't have investigative powers. So you have to take everything with a grain of salt. None of this is definitive, and the numbers that we get are relatively small. So most years we get between 20 and 40 reports. This year so far, I had call number 39 this week. So our numbers are really small. So what I like to say when I share this is that it indicates trends, not definitive, just indicates trends in our community. So what's important about this is race, and race. The majority of the intakes that we get are based on racial discrimination. We do hear about discrimination based on other protected classes, but race, by far and wide, is the reason that people call us. That's usually followed by disability, and then religion, LGBTQIA status, but race is the big one. And then where do we hear it? Well, as you can see, it changes a lot year to year, but I've been hearing so much about the schools. This is happening in schools, on school buses, in the playground, at sporting events related to the schools. So when we talk about what are we going to do, we have to talk about the schools. It comes up in housing, comes up in healthcare. So it happens, unfortunately, everywhere. So what does it look like? Well, as I said, it's happening a lot in schools. I don't want to dwell a whole lot on any one of these stories. They're all pretty awful. I've heard about kids getting on the school bus and doing the Heil Hitler salute. I've heard about kids getting on the school bus and being called every kind of racial slur that you can imagine. The housing story that I want to share is that a gentleman called me last year and he said, "Leslie, I'm trying to rent a house, and the landlord said straight up to my face, 'I'm so sorry, I don't rent to veterans because they have too much emotional baggage.'" When it comes to traffic stops, show of hands, who's ever taken a turn without turning on their blinker? Right? Right, the police officers and the district attorney are exempt from these questions. Who's ever driven with an expired sticker? Right? Okay. So, there are a lot of people who call me, people of color, who call me to say, "Leslie, I got stopped by the police. And I think I got stopped because I was driving while black or driving while brown." Now, every single one of those phone calls involved something like I took a turn without using my blinker. And so every one of those phone calls that I've received, yes, the police saw them doing something wrong. But let me tell you, I drove a minivan for 1,000,000 years. I have 3 kids, right? And it turned out that I drove with an expired inspection sticker, sorry, official people, for a year. I drove that van with an expired sticker for a year. Well, wouldn't you know that my husband, who is a man of color, the first time he drove my minivan in town with an expired inspection sticker, he was pulled over. When I talk about differential health care provision, I worked with a woman for a long time who called me. Her mother passed away here in one of our Cape Cod hospitals, and she was the healthcare proxy. She was the decision maker, and she was upset. It's really hard when your parent is dying. But the nursing staff and the lab technicians decided that she was an angry Black woman. So they made healthcare decisions for the dying mother without consulting the woman because they didn't want to deal with her. Employment discrimination, the example that I have, is a gentleman who called me. He said, Leslie, I've been in my job for 25 years, but when one promotion came up on the team, I didn't get it. And when I asked my supervisor why, they said, you're too old, you're gonna retire. Discrimination happens. It happens to every single one of those categories. Harassment in public spaces, we all hear about. And harassment in public spaces, I find, really does touch on most of those protected classes. That's where we hear about race. That's most of where our LGBTQIA incidents come in. It's where our gender identity cases come in. So we hear about a lot of them across all of the protected groups. Likewise, the same goes for online hate speech. Now, it is covered by the First Amendment unless there's a criminal element. I know that this has come up in some of the Falmouth forums online, that there is ugly language being used. Again, it happens across all of those protected classes. It is ugly. It's real. It happens in Falmouth. It happens in Barnstable County. It happens across our country. But we cannot pretend that this is not happening here, because it is. So we at the Human Rights Commission, again, I'm a social worker, not a lawyer, not a police official. So we refer folks out. We do have a really good working relationship with all of our local police departments, and anytime someone calls and it sounds like a crime, the first thing I'm going to do is say, let's connect you to the police department. But we also work with lawyers across the state who can investigate discrimination, who can investigate bias and hate. We also refer out to all of the amazing community organizations that exist on Cape Cod. If you haven't seen it, Barnstable County has a great list of organizations across the county that provide housing services and healthcare and support for the elderly. I mean, you name it, it's out there on Cape Cod. So we make a lot of referrals out. And I love this slide because we do make a difference. And as the lieutenant said, sometimes people just want to be heard. Sometimes people just want their story on record. Sometimes people can't get the services that they need unless someone helps. And so a lot of times I can pick up the phone and call and everyone goes, oh, it's the Human Rights Commission. I better do the right thing. So we do help people get the services that they need. And some of the cases that we've worked on have been investigated by MCAD, by the Commission Against Discrimination. And findings have been found in people's favor, which is great. So I want to shift us a little bit to the community building part. So the title of this talk was Understanding Hate, which we've talked about, but it was also building better community. Now, I think Falmouth is pretty great, and so I don't even know if we can get better because we're great, right? But we need to work on building community. And so I want to talk about how we do that at the individual level, the organizational level, and then the community level. So Barnstable No Place for Hate runs these amazing active bystander workshops. Jean Morrison is one of the trainers. She also happens to be the chair of our Human Rights Commission. But one of the things that they talk about in the active bystander workshop is this. It's the 5 Ds of active bystanding. Gina and Chris Morin, the other facilitator, talk about finding your superpower. So what I want to say here is that everybody needs to find what works for them. Because what you need to do is you need to do something. You can't just sit back and watch and hear these events going down and do nothing. Now, the direct, I hate. I cannot stand confrontation. It's not my superpower. But the example I like to use, I'm really good at distracting. So if I see somebody harassing somebody else and I feel like I'm going to be safe if I step in, I'm going to step in and I'm going to spill my coffee. Why? Because it takes the attention away from the hateful speech that's happening and can help the person who's being victimized move away. So I'm a really good distractor. Again, I recommend the active bystander workshop. I'm not going to go through all of it. Documentation, that's pretty obvious. Delegation, pretty obvious. Everybody needs to find what works for them. Because again, you must do something. Even if it's after an incident happens and you're going to call the lieutenant and say, hey, lieutenant, I saw this go down, so that he can document it, do something. Now, many of you are already engaged in community groups like Racial Justice Falmouth, and that is fantastic. So organizational stuff you can do. This comes from UNICEF, so it's pretty straightforward. Celebrate other cultures, and I know that you do. I know there was just a Wampanoag celebration last week. It's great because the goal is to get people less afraid of their neighbors, right? So when you celebrate the good, that's a really good way to bring people out and make connections. If you feel comfortable, call out bigotry and hate speech. Teaching kindness. Now, yes, that's in the schools, but it's also in community. We can all be better versions of ourselves. We can be kinder. Act in solidarity. I also know that here in Falmouth, you have a lot of different groups. The more that the different groups work together, the stronger that message is going to be. And I didn't say this is UNICEF, support your human rights organizations. This one, again, it's long. You can read for yourself, so I won't read all of them. But number 1, act, do something. Again, do something. You're all here, so I know this is all an issue that you care about. So keep caring, keep speaking up, keep trying, don't be afraid. The other one that I really wanted to point out was number 6, was create an alternative. So I bring this up specifically because I have heard about hate speech in online forums in Falmouth. And I think our tendency when you read something really ugly is to immediately go on and be like, oh my God, how can you say this, blah, 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 blah. But the suggestion is, instead of engaging in that hateful, negative post, create an alternative. So start a new post that highlights something great in your community. And then contact everybody in your organization and tell them, hey, like my post, comment on my post, so that the hateful post is going to get lost in the world of the internet. Now, ideally, the moderator of any online platform would take down a hateful post, but instead of you arguing on that hateful post, create an alternative. Again, stay engaged, dig deeper within yourself, do something. And that's it. You can always find me. I know my last name is hard to spell, but if you go on to Barnstable County's website, you'll be able to find me. Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. That was great. I'd like to suggest we give another round of applause to Ryan and Leslie. That was so informative. And at this point in time, I'd like to invite our DA, Rob Galaboys, to discuss what to do if you are a victim and how this could proceed through the court. So please welcome Rob, or Mr. Galaboys. I don't know.
Does this microphone work right here? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it's taped down. If I stand in the middle, will you pick me up? All right.
No.
You won't?
Yeah, just you could pull the tape up.
Here we go. Something like that. That works, right? Hi, everyone. Hi. Can you hear me okay? Yes. Okay. First of all, I want to say thank you to the Falmouth Racial Justice for hosting this event. And looking around the room, and we have so many stakeholders here, and that's awesome, obviously. But we also have about 25-ish people from the local community that are here on a beautiful Sunday afternoon. So I want to say, seriously, thank you to all of you for taking the time to come in here to listen to us today. So my name is Rob Galaboys. I am the district attorney for the Cape Cod and the islands. I was sworn into office in January 2023, so I've been here about 20 months or so. I know a lot of you don't really know too much about me, so I'm going to give you what we call the Reader's Digest version. I don't know if they still have Reader's Digest anymore, but a very brief synopsis. I didn't grow up here in the Cape. I grew up in a really small town called Millis, about 25 miles southwest of Boston. However, my connection to the Cape was here in Falmouth in the mid-'70s. My grandparents lived on Sandwich Road, about 100 yards from the Falmouth Jewish congregation right there on Sandwich Road. So I've been coming down here since the mid-'70s. Back then, you know, you had the little black and white television. They had antennas, and I'd watch the Red Sox game during my summer vacations. Then you fast forward a couple decades, now I'm getting out of law school, and basically my first job was down here as a prosecutor. Phil Rollins, who founded this office, hired me as a prosecutor. Now we have five district courts across the Cape and the islands: Barnstable, Falmouth, Orleans, Martha's Vineyard, and Nantucket. Guess which district court I was assigned to? Falmouth. So both in a personal level, I've been coming to Falmouth since the mid-'70s, and professionally, my career essentially started working as a prosecutor. I was the day in, day out prosecutor of the Falmouth District Court, 97, 98, somewhere in that vicinity. And I began to build a really good relationship with the Falmouth Police Department. For those of you that might remember, the chief at the time was a gentleman by the name of David Cusalito. One of my bigger cases early on in my career, for those of you, anyone here in the mid to late 90s, anyone live here in town back then? There was a double fatal homicide, car crash, Sam Turner Road. Defendant's last name was Ladico, and it was a pursuit case, and the defense was pointing the fingers squarely at the officer who was pursuing that individual as he raced through several streets and wound up crashing and wrapping the car around a tree on Sam Turner Road. At the end of that case, he was convicted of 2 counts of double motor vehicle homicide, so the Falmouth Police Department was exonerated, essentially, by that conviction. So I've had a long relationship with Falmouth PD, even though, you know, took a little break for a little while. I worked in the office for about 5.5 years. I went into the defense side for a couple decades, and now I'm back as the district attorney. And I will say, I have to commend Falmouth PD for the way they've kind of grown over that particular time. We have a caseworker that's now working for Falmouth PD. That's a big deal that Falmouth PD took those steps to hire a caseworker. We have community engagement officers. We have a school resource officer. And we have 2 school resource officers. Thanks for pointing that out, Ms. Rhodes. So Falmouth PD is what I'm thinking to be very progressive and to the modern times, if you will. So I just wanted to provide that as a little bit of background. And all right, so here we are having a conversation about hate incidents. And I want to thank the Lieutenant. That was an incredible presentation. I can't touch it, honestly. And I'm struggling right now to figure out what to say now. But I will let you know this. When I came in last spring, I was asked a basic question when I was at an event. What's something that you've come across that you didn't necessarily expect when you ran for the position and you were sworn in? Instantly, I thought of the volume of hate incidents we have across the Cape and the Islands. I candidly had no idea. In my short tenure here, we've had, unfortunately, a lot of high-profile ones. We had one, last winter here, as you touched upon, sir, with the swastika and the snow or the ice at a pond. We had an incident in Mashpee where someone wrote outside the office of the Mashpee Wampanoag Language Reclamation Office. We had an incident on Main Street, Hyannis, involving some allegations of assault based on race that went viral. The video of that went viral. We had an incident down in Chatham where there's an allegation of an African-American boy, one or two white boys trying to drown him. And we had an incident on Martha's Vineyard where United Patriots, a white supremacy group, tacked signs on telephone poles outside of black-owned businesses in Oak Bluffs. And as the lieutenant said, those are the high-profile ones. So unfortunately, these types of incidences are going on across the entire district. As I just provided, all those examples cover pretty much my district from one end to the other end and out in the islands. It got to the point where, again, early on in my administration, we formed a hate incidents working group. Leslie is a member of that group, and I'm very grateful, thank you. An outstanding presentation yourself, by the way. And they meet regularly to try to address some ideas on how we can confront it. How do we work with the hate incidents that keep popping up on the regular? One thing that I'm going to try to do as district attorney, I'm going to try to see if I can secure some additional funding for our budget to try to hire more social workers on staff. We want to try to help our school districts as best they can. They're doing everything they can to combat hate incidents, but quite honestly, there's too much. So we want to see if we can bring in some social workers and help supplement their efforts. Does anyone have like an idea of how a case kind of proceeds through the court system? I know the lieutenant touched upon it a little bit, but as he mentioned, you know, if something happens and a victim calls 911 or walks into the police department, that certainly gets the ball rolling and the police begin their investigation. And there's a couple different paths that, as he indicated, that could go down. Someone might be arrested at the end of the day at that investigation. Or a hearing might be set up at the courthouse, commonly referred to as a clerk magistrate's hearing, where the clerk makes a determination. Is there probable cause to go forward with a case? If the case goes forward, that is, someone's arrested, or if a clerk says, hey, we have probable cause and issues a complaint, that's when our office gets involved. The person will be arraigned. The case will go through a series of what's called pretrial conferences. The parties, meaning the prosecutor, our office, and the defense, try to hash out discovery type issues to make sure the defense has everything that the Commonwealth has by way of evidence, and the case makes its way towards either a disposition or a plea. That's essentially how a case typically goes. In your more serious cases, I know some people probably have served. Anyone here serve in grand jury at any point during their lives? Yeah, we have a couple people right here. So the more serious cases make their way before a grand jury where our office will present an investigation. At the end of that investigation, more often than not, we ask for the jury's consideration and returning indictments in those cases. And as the lieutenant mentioned, those are the more serious cases. Those are the high-level felonies. So that's essentially how a case makes its way through. My apologies for not having a PowerPoint presentation, but that's essentially my spiel. I'm going to leave you with this. I always ask, or I try to leave people with a takeaway. This is my requested takeaway from this particular group. Kelly Quealy joins me from my office. She's in the back there trying to hide right now. She doesn't like when I talk about her. But Kelly is my community engagements officer. And as I mentioned, we do have that hate incidents working group. If you are interested in joining us, we are very interested in working with you. We also have something known as the DA and Us Community Coalition. And what that is every single town we have a chapter. And it's made up of everyday citizens. Some towns have a half dozen, some have up to a dozen folks. And we meet quarterly. And it's just a way for our office to try to keep a finger on the pulse of what's going on in any different community. As a seasoned staffer in our office noted, you look at the Cape from satellite, you see one Cape Cod. But as we all know, living down here on the Cape, there's at least 15 different Cape Cods, 15 different towns. However, most of us identify ourselves with the villages that we live in. So by having these quarterly meetings with our respective chapters of the DA coalition, again, it just allows us to kind of keep in touch and what's going on in your given community. So I'd ask if you have an interest in joining the DANS Coalition or the Hate Incidents Working Group, please talk to Kelly. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate your time.
Thanks very much, Rob. I'm not going to take questions and answers at this point. We're stretching it a little bit. I'm going to move right into the second portion of our program and invite up Mara and Chris to sit with me up here. Eric. We can spread out, we can, whatever makes you most comfortable. Thank you. So in this portion, we have two very brave people who have agreed to share their personal stories. They're members of our community, and I'm going to ask everyone to not ask any questions. Please listen actively and hear what they have to say. I'm not going to introduce you. Please introduce yourselves. I don't know. I should have asked who would like to go first.
Me? Want me to go first? Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Well, my name is Mara Ray Betty. I'm a long-term resident of Plymouth, but I do a lot of advocacy here in the Cape for as long as I've been a resident of Plymouth. I recently moved to Boston, but a lot of my family still lives in Plymouth. Prior to starting my new job in the city for a national architecture firm, I had my own practice in architecture 12 years in Plymouth, and I worked in the South Coast at a small firm for 11 years prior to that. I have a 24-year-old and a 23-year-old son. So, I'm involved with the Cape and Islands Trans Emergency Fund and Transgender Day of Remembrance. I'm an architect. I'm an associate at my company. I'm a project manager. Our company, Moody Nolan, is the largest black-owned architecture firm in the country, and we have 12 physical offices, about 15 studios total, and I work nationally in some really difficult places for me. I just to get to my stories that I like to share, I could talk about issues that I've had in my job search. I could talk about issues that I had with my apartment hunting when I moved to the Boston area. I could talk about dating. But two incidents I think relate really to the criteria that we heard earlier. When I had my own practice, a project in 2020, I got a referral for a religious organization that needed support here on the Cape. And I had taken that work based on the referral from a friend. I hadn't met the client in person. I had already started my transition. I had completed the services for them, which wasn't my religious affiliation, but that didn't matter. They needed support. And it was about $3,000 worth of fee. And at the time when I completed the services and asked for payment, the client noticed a difference between the name that I was using and my legal name for legal documents and my architecture registration stamp and so on. And they called me, and they had asked, what's going on here? We don't understand. And so I was like, well, I just need you to, write the check out tomorrow because that's what the bank accounts are, and my stamp says something else, and and I was going to leave it at that. And most of my clients at the time, well, prior to 2020, anyways, as I was coming out, that wasn't really a problem, but she wouldn't let it go. And actually, my youngest son was in the car, and he was actually because I took the call while driving to some sport event, and he
Hands for you.
Yeah, of course. So, he was actually getting frustrated by what the client was starting to imply. And a long story short, they had asked me to come out here to meet them, talk about what was going on in my life, and try to understand if they could, maybe I was lost and needed to be found or something. And long story short, I did the typical sort of 30, 60-day, 90 notices and things like that, and never got paid for that. I never pursued it. I didn't want the hassle. It wasn't worth it to me. There's many other things that was going on at the time, and I just didn't think that it was worth my energy. But hearing it in the context of the conversation today, I wish that I had at least reported it in some way, because as a small sole proprietorship, it was a big deal to my income and how support my family and so on. So, and I've since moved on from that. But I will say another incident that people might have heard of was the Taunton Drag Queen Story Hour they had a couple years ago. I think it was 2022. And a friend of mine was one of the people reading to basically a group of queer families that they were all invited through our local LGBTQI groups. So, and it was open to the public, but most people knew who was going to be there, and a small group in the basement of the Taunton Library. And I remember I was just supporting my friend because they had supported me in different efforts, and I showed up a little bit late, and I noticed, like, in the parking lot that a lot of people were in their cars that were just idling, and I had kind of parked on the street. And I remember looking at a police officer because I was last, and there was, like, no legal parking. I'm like, you're not going to give me a ticket when I leave? And it just and I went through the last one in, and as soon as I walked through the door in the basement, these neo-Nazi folks from, I think, New Hampshire came in wearing full-on, like, they had baseball caps, they had full-on masks, all black, they had slack gear, they all were communicating through earpieces, and they came in waves where there was, like, a number of people that came in, and they kind of mingled, and people kind of gasped, but then they were saying, well, we have a right to be here. And, people were trying to ask them to take their masks off, but it was during COVID, and there's no, you couldn't make people do that. And they started interrupting. And then a few police officers came in, and we started to have, like, a balance between them and the police officers, but then more people came. I think because they went to the wrong place initially, but then more people came in. And we realized it was kind of outnumbered. Some of the families were leaving, and then they would take the seats in the front, and they would heckle. They would say things, nasty things, really nasty things. And I kind of was filming my friend, and I was in the back, and I kind of moved to get, like, a better angle. And I knew they were communicating because someone came from the front with their camera, and they kind of got in my face. And, so we were kind of doing this, and I later got asked to do some conflict avoidance, but I felt like at that point I was like, you're coming at me. This is supposed to be a safe space, and they were saying things like, oh, look at that, that's a man, and then they had 2 or 3 of them around me, and they were big, and I'm not small, but they were big, and they got the phone. Well, they actually had cameras, and really close to my face, and I'm just kind of like, don't do this. And the camera went flying, and first of all I was like, oop. But then they shoved me, and they started to, like, jump, and then the police came in and just broke it up. But I remember they took my friend out, like, a back door, and I was kind of shaking. Everyone had dispersed, and I went to leave. And when I went out the front door, my car was, like, surrounded by these folks because they were congregating right there. And I don't know why. I do know that some people there were later doxxed by some people that, they got their license plates and they figured out things that were going on. And a police officer brought me back in and brought me out back door, and I got to go out a wrong way of a one-way. And I remember, like, these guys had, they all had Timberlands on and same outfits. And this was like 11 in the morning. I ended up not going home to my apartment, driving around, filling up at least once in the Middleborough area, and remembering, like, when I stopped for gas, like, everybody that came out of the gas station, I'm like trying to see, like, if they had just suspicious that they had the same shoes on and taking the mask off, because, like, could these people be people that live in my building and I don't know? Because there was, people who wouldn't say hi to me there and things like that. So those things sort of stuck with me. And what's kind of crazy is I have it on video, and I know there was some follow-up with it. Anyway, so you can make of it what you want. But that was, I thought, two experiences that related to this conversation.
Thank you
Oh.
so much for
Don't be sorry. Don't be sorry.
Thank you.
No. It's a long time ago.
No, it lingers.
It does linger.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you.
So, recently, Megan asked me if I would talk about an incident that occurred 4 years ago, this October. And I had to think back, because I had really blocked a lot of what happened out of my mind. So I went back, found articles that were in the Falmouth Enterprise, found a picture, found articles written by No Place for Hate, commentaries, if you will, and from the editor of the Falmouth Enterprise, opinion letters, if you will. But in doing so, I thought, there's been a lot more than just that one big incident that occurred to me 4 years ago. And I'm thinking back to President's Day of 2019, when a large group, dozens and dozens of people, were on the Falmouth Green. We were there to protest Trump's declaration of a national emergency to obtain funding for a border wall along the Mexican border. It had snowed the day before overnight. A snowplow, private snowplow, contracted by Falmouth, contracted to do snowplowing in Woods Hole, came down Main Street, paused in front of St. Barnabas Church, dropped the plow, and accelerated. Accelerated so that I could hear it. Other people could hear it. It was a very threatening movement. And went down along the green at the curb, throwing up slush and ice to all the people who were holding signs out there protesting Trump's latest maneuver. That snowplow driver stopped at the base of the green and parked for 5 minutes. And we were all wondering, this is bizarre, it was very intimidating. But then came up the other side of the green in front of Cape Cod, in front of the Congregational Church, and did the same thing. People got splashed by ice and debris and gravel and all that. Fortunately, nobody was really hurt. They were intimidated and soaked, but nobody had an eyeball blown out or anything crazy like that. I, amongst other people, went to the Falmouth Police Station and filed a police report. Many, many, many months later, in the spring, I went to the hearing at the Falmouth Courthouse. The driver lost his job with Falmouth DPW, but more importantly, the penalty for such an action was 20 hours community service and a letter of apology. We have a different DA in town now. I think they would have handled it a bit differently, in my opinion, because I really think that was brushed aside back then. What Megan asked me to talk about was what happened, again, 4 years ago. I was out doing fall cleanup in my front yard with my grandson, who was 14 at the time. and found something in the ornamental grasses and moved it aside. And this is what I saw. And I know you can't see it back there. Yep. Thank you, Megan. But it's a black doll's head. And it says on it. And yes, I had a Black Lives Matter sign in my front yard. And I had a Biden sign in my front yard. But this act of intimidation really shook me to the core. And it happened in Falmouth. I think it was shameful. I think I was targeted. And so if people don't think hate happens here, they're absolutely wrong. I did call the police. They did come out. They did an investigation. They took the information. I have a copy of the police report. And nothing ever happened. Because who knows who did such a thing? I was at church today, came home from church. I have various candidates' signs on my front lawn. And right next to my mailbox, the Harris Wall sign was missing. The stake was there, but the sign was gone. I took a photograph of it. I put it on Fabulous Falmouth Facebook page, saying, a coward took my sign. The responses were so hateful. Public responses on a Facebook page. That just sickened me. And it brought forth all that vulnerability and safety issues that I'd had 4 years ago. That's all I wanted to share with you.
We have 1 minute of silence. Let's just pause. I want to thank you, Mara. Thank you so much for sharing. Thank you, Chris.
for having me.
It takes a lot of courage. Appreciate you.
We appreciate you.
Oh, thank you. At this point, we're into the third portion of our event, third and final. We have amazing resource tables here to help people, sign up if you need resources or volunteer if you want to be a resource to our community. We have the CAPE Organization for the Rights of the Disabled, or CORD. We have PFLAG with Joe here. We have the Cape Cod, Cape Verdean Museum and Cultural Center. Barbara had to leave, but her table is over there, and they have a pretty amazing offering. We have the NAACP with Lynn. Thank you so much. We have the South Coast Coastal Counties Legal Services here. We have the Falmouth Police Department here. And we have the DA's office here. So thank you all for coming. Please meet your community members, check out the resources, and we appreciate you.
Thank you.